Hey guys, it's Pete from Pete from Anxiety here. Welcome into today's episode. I appreciate y'all being here so much. Let's talk about a few things real quick. The Pete vs. Anxiety Team Anxiety Facebook group. Are you a part of it? You're not? What are you waiting for? The link's down here in the description down below, or go to Facebook and search Pete vs. Anxiety. Then look for the Team Anxiety Team page and join it today. Why not? You can join and help. It'll be great. Yeah, like right now. Hurry up. Stop what you're doing, pause this video, go do it right now. But anyways, let's also talk about the Pete vs. Anxiety YouTube page. If you're here right now, you're probably following it most likely. If not, head on over there, subscribe, be sure to like and comment on the videos and let me know, because all that stuff really helps, guys. I really appreciate it. And help me break the stigma that mental health is talked about enough. But anyways, guys, let's get in today's episode. I'll have a great one. Thank you so much again. And as I always say, don't ask how your day is, ask how your mental health is today. Guys, welcome to an exciting episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. My guest today is a trailblazing mental health clinician with a penchant for holistic healing with quantum science. Infusing her practice with wisdom of both Eastern and Western philosophies, my guest is not just an expert at integrated mental health, she's transformative force for wellness. Please welcome in the one, the only, Cristine Hall. How you doing today, Cristine?
I'm doing great.
So why don't you give everybody a little more about your background? I know you have a master's in psychology, a doctorate in natural medicine, which is very interesting, kind of a combination for a lot of people. Then I know you're also certified in EMDR and hypnotherapy developer, and you're also the developer of the Zero Point Meridian technique and the Quantum Wholeness Meditation. That's a lot of words.
Yeah, that was a lot of words. So yeah, the experience I had is when I was working on my master's degree 25 years ago. I was in the department of psychology, and I was also going through a divorce. And so I was going through it emotionally. One of the first papers I did in my master's program was on emotional intelligence. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And, surely it ties in with, the psychology world and they had a lot of research, actually. Daniel Goleman did quite a bit of longitudinal studies and put a lot of stuff together when he published that book. And it was not received well in my department. Like, we don't talk about emotions is basically what I learned. You can't measure them. They're messy. We don't know what to do with them. So we measure IQ. That's what we do, And so I learned how to measure IQ, and I learned, the ADHD scales, and I learned all these different ways of measuring mental health, but it was all geared towards the pathology, get a diagnosis. And I went into private practice, and I learned that most of the time in private practice, people aren't measuring anything. So it was a lot of what I learned. I loved it. Like, I loved psychometrics and the numbers, but in the field of really working with people, you're working with people, not numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so I developed that whole other side where I figured out, like, you've got to talk about emotions. And none of what I learned was prepared me for real emotional conversations with people. So pretty much all of that I had to learn at school. So I later wrote a book, and I put in the back cover, what I didn't learn at grad school. 90% of what I used in private practice didn't come from grad school. It came from life coaches. It came from, Barbara DeAngelis in the 90s. So I was, a lot of what I was pulling from was stuff from the 90s at the time. And she, basically was a stage presence. She was a thought leader, sort of, but before there were thought leaders, she was talking about emotions. And that was what her books were about. She was working with people who were suffering in their relationships or in their, mostly relationships. Yeah. And saying, you've got to do the emotional work. You're not going to solve this. So that's why I was going to get my answers.
Well, that makes sense. So, I mean, but you were always told not to worry about emotions, but then she's telling you she's working with emotions.
Like, that's the only thing that works.
Yeah. It'd be kind of like it'd be a weird experience for you, though, because you're like, wait a minute, this is not what they were teaching me in school. They're saying, don't worry about that, worry about this. And then this other person's talking about it like, oh, hey, let's worry about this, not that. And you're just like, oh, well, this is a conflicting road I'm at right now.
Yeah. So I got a lot of training from people that had no degrees, right? No clinical background at all, but they'd figured out what worked. And so in the world of life coaching, what I figured out, and they called it mentoring and different things in, the last few decades. But what I've learned is it's the people that figure it out teach others what worked for them. In the world of mental health and clinical fields, you may have people that have not figured it out in their personal lives, but they pass the test or they complete the degree, right? And so they have the training and they're considered the professional. But they may have not figured out their lives or how to do life or how to do relationships.
That's
right?
scary.
It is.
It's really scary because when you're right when you do the air quotations of there's license or whatever. It's like, okay, just because everybody has a driver's license doesn't mean they all can go drive NASCAR, or they think they drive NASCAR kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Or it doesn't mean anything about how they understand the workings of a car.
Exactly, that too.
Yeah. Yep.
That's so interesting, though. I mean, let me ask you though, doctrine in natural medicine. What is cover exactly? Like Western medicine or Eastern medicine? I mean, like all the different kind of natural things they use, kind of stuff like that.
Such a good question. Okay, so I did a lot of well, one of the tools I learned around the time I was getting my master's degree, I started studying EFT. So it was about 2003.
Yeah.
And Gary Craig was kind of the dude who was, bringing EFT, emotional freedom technique to the world. And I did his early training. So there's a few hundred of us maybe, but then it just really rippled, it really expanded beyond that. And that was his goal. He wanted it to reach people. And he did a great job in just putting it out there. Yeah. So I was one of those that got trained in it. And I started using it with people and realizing this works, and so it involves meridians, which is an Eastern model. And I actually developed, that's where Zero Point Meridian comes from. Okay. So Zero Point Meridian, I was in the process of kind of developing this and I realized I've got something and it's meant, like there was pieces coming to me organically and through different modalities and all kinds of stuff. And it was like, I was meant to kind of create this thing and bring it to the world. And so part of that was understanding the quantum world. So I got my doctorate specifically from Quantum University.
Oh, okay.
And it was around the same time I started also studying Buddhism.
Okay.
What I learned was mindfulness. In 15 years ago, people were talking about mindfulness and, or started, 10, 15 years ago, it was like this word started to come into the world of mental health.
Yeah.
And what they weren't telling you is that it really came through Buddhist scholar or, Buddhists. And there's kind of a scholarly or a secular path of Buddhism and then a spiritual path of Buddhism.
Yeah.
So the Buddhism paths are a little bit different, like it's not a religion because it created this other avenue where they started doing research with it even.
Yeah.
And so there's things like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. And, that was brought, I think, is that Jack Kornfield or somebody like that? Anyway, somebody like that come along and created a thing that they could bring into the professional world and even research and find, how does this work? So that's all those things were kind of coming together at the same time.
Yeah.
And I enrolled in Quantum University for their PhD program. And so what happened over, that was 2015. And so over a 5-year period, all this started to kind of gel. And I realized what I'd created in this different version of EFT was a way to bring that quantum piece in, which brings that 0 point meridian to it. And so when you find that it's the quantum zero, it's like the space that they're finding is not empty.
Yeah.
It's this space that's full, mind full of consciousness.
That's so fascinating. I'm like, wow. Because I think it's interesting, though, when you talk about Buddhism and you're talking about spiritual, I think that's the only thing people really know it for, though. They always think of the Buddhist monks and things like that, and every movie you've seen where anything like that has it's always been spiritual, but never the other part of it that people never talk about, which I think is interesting because if there's 2 parts, why are we not talking about the second part as well?
Yeah. It's right. I mean, when you say Buddhism, some people will clarify,
Yeah.
But I've done both. Like I've done some of the studies with, like meditation has, some good science behind it.
Yeah.
And then I've also gone to a Buddhist Sangha and sat with a former Buddhist monk. And oh my gosh, it's almost like you can't put into words the presence of someone who's gone on that path. And that's what I'm like, please don't water down that presence, because the spiritual presence that was the origin of this science-based kind of mindfulness, it deserves to be acknowledged, really.
No, I agree. I think that'd be amazing, honestly, just to be able to be in that presence and say that you've done that. That's awesome, though. I mean,
It's amazing.
That'd be something great, though. Like I've had the opportunity to do something like I never thought I'd be able to do too, and nothing near that, obviously, but that would have been amazing. Just you could just feel the presence of people, and I'm real sensitive to energy, so you can feel the energy of these people coming off, and it would just be amazing. It probably must be euphoric, if anything, too.
But let's talk about anxiety.
Okay.
Can we talk about that? Okay.
Definitely.
So I will tell you, so I'm in recovery. I have one of the things that I look at in my life is I had chronic anxiety. I had really social anxiety. I was not well and not safe as a junior high student, for example.
So let me ask you really fast. What was the turning point that you knew that you needed help with your anxiety? What was that one moment where you realized, like, hey, there's something not right here going on?
I knew I wasn't right most of my childhood.
Yeah.
There wasn't a moment where I knew it was like I knew I had issues. The turning point for me, and this is not what I recommend, it was when I threw out my oars. I use a metaphor, and I have something called frequency school. So it teaches people how to elevate their frequency, and it's kind of designed like a school. And I use this metaphor of being in a boat. And it was like, I described my life as it's like I was in this boat and I had one oar, and the one oar I had was works. Okay. So there's a faith and works oar. I had the works. I knew how to do the stuff. I was, top of the grade. I was, never missed my homework assignment kind of thing. And a function of anxiety, like be perfect. I was perfectionist. Right.
Yeah.
And it didn't get me anywhere because I was going in circles, right? When you got one oar, you just go in circles. And so I threw the oar out in 8th grade, and I decided I'm not even going to try anymore. And I started hanging out with the rough crowd, and I started drinking, and I started smoking, and I just threw out the oars. So what happened though is the anxiety went away, which is interesting. So I went into this full bore, like, I don't care. And I'm going to be in battle with whatever this is. I'm going to fight. I went to fight instead of flight is what I did.
Yeah.
And I actually recommend knowing your nervous system enough to find a healthy way to do that. That was not a healthy way to do that, but it was functional in that I was no longer afraid of everything. I became the bully instead of the bullied. So that's the flip for me. And what I've actually been able to incorporate that, I've been able to integrate all of that, which is part of the holistic model is integration. And I've been able to integrate the bully side of myself. And it does keep me safe, sort of, but it also puts me at risk, right? Because there's a mix of that.
Right.
But that was the flip. And so I got into full-blown addiction by the time I was 19. And then there was a turning point. And that turning point is when I had a complete and total surrender. It's actually a Christmas Eve story. And for me, like, I'm a Christian, and I surrendered myself to Christ in that. I think I was 20. And the transformation that happened, I never went back. I never used, I never drank, I never smoked again. And it was a complete and total transformation. And I know that that's unique. I mean, most people, when they're in recovery, they have relapses or they go to treatment or they do 12-step programs. And I literally was transformed by a spiritual awakening. So then I was responsible to figure out what to do with my life from there. And I was already in the social work program. And so I became a substance abuse counselor. That makes sense, right? So before I went into my master's program, I was a substance abuse counselor. And with that, I taught spiritual things, because in the field of substance abuse, there is this thing called AA. And AA is based around a spiritual program. And so in the substance abuse world, that worked. Like, that was okay. The thing that's interesting is going into the mental health field, it's not a thing. So.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I can relate to your spiritual awakening, because before I start this show, I was never religious, never spiritual, anything like that. But ever since I had accepted, faith and things like that, things have taken a major turn. Like, this show came into conception. I got offered a podcast network deal right off the bat, and all these things just kept trickling into place. And it was just like little by little. And then ever since the beginning of the show to now, you can see the transformation of me as a person, because I'm learning more about myself as I go, And it was sometime around, I think, like real close to right around December. I met a person named, that called herself the Energy Alchemist. And I found out that I'm very sensitive to energy. And I never knew how to explain this experience I've had before, things like that too. And I've had several spiritual awakenings here on the show. I was talking to a woman named Sherry Ann Boyle. She was talking about this entity named Spirit that she talks to. And she said, Spirit channels through me and writes these books for me. She's got like 12 publications and things like that. She's like, I want to read something to you. Start reading something to me. And instantly you just watch me just completely go blank. Like, because all I can explain it to you is it's just like everything around me doesn't exist. Something is talking to me, or something is touching me, to the point that I am just focused on exactly what she's saying. But I don't know. I'm not saying anything for a minute. And then when everything passes, and then I just go instantly into, oh my God, let me tell you what happened. Just start rapid firing off. It was hard to explain to people, but I felt it. Like, there's no explanation to what I felt. There was something there, and I get that completely. Like, all of a sudden it just changed everything for you, and I could agree that. I know. I may be
Yeah, I'm glad you used the word faith, because that brings me back to the oars, to this.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like in my journey, the metaphor, it was like I crashed and burned at the bottom. I surrendered, and I was lifted kind of back to where I started, but I had 2 oars. Yeah. So I had the faith and the works, and then I could get somewhere. And then I really started getting somewhere, to where, I was a successful substance abuse counselor. And then I got into my master's program. I was successful as a school psychologist, and then I started private practice, and I was successful there. And then I also, at that, when I talk about that juncture, 2015 or so, it was a little bit before that, actually, I realized not every area of my life was working. Yeah. And that it was time for that next level, spiritual, whatever, or next level. And I didn't know it was going to come in the form of a Buddhist monk. Right. And so back to anxiety at that point in time, I remember standing. So in the field of mental health, like, the closest thing I think you can come to as far as a spiritual solution is mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of where I'm like kind of leaning here, is that for me, it came through my sponsor. So I ran into my sponsor after I hadn't seen her for like 12 years. And she says, there's a monk in my basement. Oh, I found out she'd followed ticktock.
There's a monk in my basement.
There's a monk. I'm going to write a book called There's a Monk in My Basement. Right?
It's a good idea, though. It sounds like a good book right there.
It's a good book. It is. It's coming. So, so I'm like, I guess I get to meet with this person, because I knew it was like my next thing. Yeah. And it had been her next thing after recovery. She'd found Buddhism. And so I stood at her door, because he was in her basement, right? And I remember the anxiety hit me. It was like, if I walk through that door, everything changes. Like, I don't know. It's the unknown, right? Yeah. No, that next level is the unknown. And so I did it. And I remember sitting in the basement with the monk. And he asked me this question. He said, what is your deepest fear? So talk about anxiety, right? Yeah. So, right, it was all coming up. And I realized what it was. It was like in this kind of surreal moment, like, I fear that I will cease to exist. Now, some people fear death, right? Yeah. Some people, there's a lot of different fears, but that one was pretty unique. Like, I remember telling him, it's the fear that I will cease to exist, that I'm so insignificant, I could poof. Yeah. And this is before the Marvel movies came out, right? Isn't that interesting?
Oh no, the snap heard around the world. That's
global fear.
Yeah.
So I could poof, and it wouldn't matter, or
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he sits with me, and we sit. And when you're in the Buddhist practice, you sit. They call them sits, right? You sit with it. You sit with your fear. You sit with this thing, and it comes up, and then you use meditation as a tool to be with it and allow, right?
Yeah.
And so we're sitting with it, and then he says, "Isn't that interesting?" He said, "Because if you ceased to exist, what part of you would there be to have any fear?" And it hit me.
Okay. That's true. Okay.
Like, there is no fear when you are, and this is where the zero comes from. When you are at zero, there is no fear.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That has to be an interesting story when you lead off with, well, there's a monk in the basement. And you're like, there are people are thinking, what the hell is the monk doing in the basement?
Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah, he was working on his visa. He couldn't leave the country. So he had found a place to stay. But yeah, that was where he was.
That's so interesting because as soon as you said that, first thing I'm thinking is like, wait, what the hell's the monk doing in the basement, man? What's going on? Don't go down there, Cristine. No, don't. That's my fear. My fear is kicking up like, oh God, girl, don't go in the basement. Something's down there.
It is, but it's the zero. And it becomes a new foundation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then when zero is your foundation and nothing is as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's like everything. I have not had anxiety since then. It's all of a sudden, it's like the only thing there is to fear is nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
And nothing is nothing.
That's a very true point, though. I mean, I still, that just makes me laugh, but I mean, it's not really shocking to me. Like I said, though, anything spiritual wise and faith and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really worry me anymore. Like I had my preconceived notions of how things would go, but it was nothing like that. So, it's because everything around you tells you these other things. And then you get these thoughts in your head that everybody's feeling your fears, telling you, oh no, don't do this. You're going to turn to like a cult member. And I'm like, it's not like that, unfortunately. Like, I don't know where you all are getting your information from. Stay off Wikipedia, and things like that, though. So let me ask you, though, about your Quantum Wholeness Meditation. What exactly is that, though?
So that came. Okay, so it continues on the monk story. So I got to know this guy, Nithya Shanti. And if you want to Google him or whatever, he's got some great YouTubes that he's funny. So he's a former Buddhist monk. So he actually went into the monastery in India, I think in his 20s.
Yeah.
And by the time he was 30, he was like, I know my life path now. And they excused him from the monkhood to become a global teacher, basically. And so he's young still.
Yeah.
I mean, but he, anyway, he was in my little town of Cache Valley, Utah. And I was able to basically bring him to a retreat. So I set up a retreat where it filled really fast. He has a real presence and people were ready for what he was teaching. So, but it was a lot of stress and it was a vegan menu. I am not a vegan. And so I'm actually grain free. And so if you're grain free and vegan, like all that's left to eat is lettuce.
Yeah.
So fruits and vegetables. But I ended up eating a waffle that was a vegan waffle, and the grains hit my system and I went into an allergic reaction.
Oh no.
So I'm in this full-blown allergic reaction at the retreat. And a couple that was there who I just really admire still. The woman came over and sees me like going into this, like my head's like pounding and you can see I'm red and my fingers are swelling up and, and I can't breathe. And she's like, can I assist you? And she says, can I put my hand on your knee? And I, of course, allowed her to do that. And within minutes, the pounding stopped. The swelling went down. The breathing opened up. Like, wow. It was amazing. So I thought, well, she's a healer. Later, she asked, like, do you want to know what I did? And she explained it was called quantum entrainment. So I get the book, by the author of this technique, and read it, and it was just like, it changed my life. I started to understand that all she did was tap into consciousness. So it's just kind of a loose thing. And I'm like, I know that there's more. I knew there was more I could do with it. So I took that in combination with other with the Buddhist meditation that I've been learning, basically. And I brought some things together, and I knew what it was. After a while, it was like, this is called Quantum Wholeness Meditation. And so it's science-based. So it's not too, spiritual, but there's a lot of very Eastern meditation practices, like Vipassana, like where you sit for 10 days, like that's a lot of silence. And I knew that wasn't realistic for people. So I became the receiver of kind of this way of meditating, and it involves some posture and some structure. And I call it the meditation for the Eastern mind and the Christian heart.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Isn't that amazing? So this is the 0 and this is the 1. So it's like this binary code, which I feel is kind of the fabric of the universe, and that we can embody that oneness and that 0. And really, when you can escape your ego mind, you have the potential to heal like all kinds of things. And so that's what I started, and I started researching it. And what we even found is, like, one of my research, so the thing I did keep from my psychology degree was, like, I love numbers and I love knowing pre and post and all that kind of stuff. And I took this technique to an intern who was working with clients she's a master's level intern in a county facility. Okay. So she's getting Medicaid clients and people who are court referred, and I mean, tough clients, teenagers, mostly teenagers. Okay. So teenagers are hard. Court referred is hard. All of that is hard.
Oh yeah.
And she was already burning out, and she wasn't even done with school. Right?
Yeah.
So I brought this to her to use with her clients. And I was able to show that not only it helped some clients, but it helped her as a practitioner, because she was meditating every session that she had clients. And it was like, it was a saving grace that gave her wellness back. And so that's one of the things it does among many.
Yeah. That's so fascinating, honestly, to me. I think a lot of that stuff is really interesting because I've been getting more into holistic healing now and all that kind of mindset of, Eastern medicine and things like that too. And I find it very fascinating, like how much of it is actually effective. And a lot of people, I think, are so easy to say no to things when they don't know anything, but you took that leap of faith when that person said, hey, let me touch your knee really fast. And she solved your issue. It's hard to say that didn't happen, because it happened right there. Like,
she brought consciousness to a part of me that wasn't freaking out. My knee wasn't freaking out.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting though. She's like, she grabs your knee and then all of a sudden, you get through the moment though. But it's so fascinating to me though, because it's like, wow, it just, all it took was that, and then what if, that never happened? You would have never led into quantum wholeness meditation itself, though, if you think about it. Which I think is really great when you really look at the universe itself. It's like, you feel like they put people in your paths for certain reasons. And those people were in your path for that reason, exactly, for you to come to that, that new method right there alone that you created. So, I mean, that's amazing too. I know some of the other.
It's amazing how life will orchestrate things. And if you believe that it's for your good and that you're not, in fact, one of the books that Nithya really liked was something about, like, some people have this sense of like the universe is conspiring against them. And there's actually a book that was written about that flipped it to say, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically the universe is all conspiring for me. It's like, it's all for me instead of against me. Yeah.
That's so funny. I think it's so interesting though, because it's like, people have that, oh, the world's out to get me kind of theory, and they always like keep burying it even more, making it worse than it has to be. But it's like, have you ever thought of thinking about what it is exactly you did for it to be in these situations? Because a lot of times you can control some of these situations depending on what it is, and things like that. And I feel like people get too far from that, and they're easy to blame everybody else or nobody wants to take responsibility anymore about anything that they do or any of these situations they cause in these, things like that too. So
yeah, full responsibility is on my, when I talk about the frequency levels, that is one key, I guess, catalyst. Talk about catalyst when you're ready to move to the next level.
Yeah.
So when, people are I call it the 200 frequency, which is where you're kind of like treading water, kind of like that, the raft that you got one oar and you could throw it all out and go downhill, or you could take full responsibility for whatever that is. And it could be, a surrender and find your higher source.
Yeah.
Be responsible for that relationship,
Very true. Very true. So looking at your background here, I do notice you have hypnotherapy listed as well. What made you go that route though? I mean, that's an interesting one to get into though, if you think about it.
And I will share, it's actually a specific type of hypnotherapy for past life regression. So, and as a Christian, I was not one of those that was talking about past lives or was like, I can't go there, So opening up the Eastern door did open up some thought around like, does that make sense? And I will tell you, there is a lot of, sometimes you'll have like a trauma that's so deep seated, you don't even know where it comes from.
Yeah.
And opening up, and you could call it archetypes. You could call it, like collective memory, whatever you want to call it. But when you open that up, sometimes you will find this understanding like, oh, no wonder I've had this issue my whole life. It all makes sense now. It comes from something you don't have conscious recollection of.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think hypnotherapy can be really helpful. And with anxiety, for example, that, there are some subconscious things that are so deep that we can't find it consciously. And so having a hypnotherapy session or using principles of hypnotherapy can resolve things that like cognitive behavioral is just not even going to touch.
Yeah.
So I went through that. I'm actually writing a series of books. So I am launching this year, the first in a series. It's called Love You Once. Love You Twice is the next book. So it goes in, and it is around, and it's kind of like around this concept of hypnotherapy as a solution, but it features a mental health therapist who is trying to figure out why she's stuck, in these situations in her life. But then it has a parallel story that in the first book, it's 1930s Germany. It's basically a woman who's studying quantum things. Okay. So she works with Max Planck at the Wilhelm Institute. But she's it's the wrong time and the wrong place. She's half Jewish. And so things shift for her in a way that have to be resolved later. And so that's what's kind of interesting about this one. Is it's kind of like, is this her, or is this just like a soul experience?
Yeah.
Where, this mental health therapist becomes aware of her and connected to her and helps to resolve things for her. And so it's kind of cool.
So what's the timeline on the books right now? Because they sound interesting already.
Oh, they're interesting. Yeah. So it's in rewrite right now. So I'm hoping by fall we'll have it published.
Well, that looks like you have to come back and tell us all about it when it's ready for the books to come out. Yeah, for sure. See, we can talk more about the books then. And
and definitely, if people find my main website is CristineWhole.com. That's where, and there's no H in Cristine. That is the key to getting the right place. I have the books on there, and I've got a few. I've got some. I did a book also on 10 ways to balance your brain chemistry.
Okay.
That helps in understanding what's going on, the mechanics of anxiety, and how to address that naturally.
That's definitely one I have to check out for sure. That one sounds interesting too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out. So what brought you to write the book though? I mean, was it just your experience with anxiety yourself? Because you said you had chronic anxiety, correct?
I did. So I started it through just kind of my personal experience. A lot of it is like my own journey and getting in touch with these storylines that started coming to me. Like I actually I went unconscious, And it was part of, actually in my real life, it was part of these allergic reactions I was having.
Yeah.
And when I came to, I had body memory. And it's kind of a weird thing. So body memory is a little different than psychic, like like mental memory.
Yeah.
Because it was like there was sensations that I couldn't pinpoint. And it was like it existed in me differently, And so I actually went to a hypnotherapist, and in that hypnotherapy session, I was able to see this whole other lifetime in 1930s Germany. So
that's really the book starts for the other one. Okay, now it's all leading together. Okay, it makes sense.
Yeah, now you see how it all connects.
That's so interesting, though. When you found that out, you're like 1930. Like, whoa, that's way before me. Like, were they calling that like a past life, basically?
Yes. And so some people might theorize. So actually, what was interesting about that one is that I had a view of a woman, basically, you could say, yeah, probably part Jewish, and, in a chair, not in a happy place, in a research kind of medical facility sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that view of her, I realized, oh, that wasn't me. But I kind of had the sense of like, I was kind of a angel support and training. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So
yeah, that's really interesting, actually.
Given this opportunity to bring support and, and healing, but it ended up kind of like traumatizing me, which is interesting to think about too. So it's like I have this awareness and memory almost, but the body memory is interesting because I don't know. It's just, it's quantum. Let's just call it that.
It's pretty fascinating, honestly, because I did have a guest on. She talked about past life. She said she met a man who didn't like needles, but couldn't figure out why it was. And he reacted and everything, his body react, but he's never had this problem. But all of a sudden he started feigning the needles, which it turned out that is in a past life, he was executed by some kind of needle, like lethal injection or something.
Yeah.
Some kind of thing. I was just like, really, because mentally he had no idea what's going on. His body knew that when that object got close, he just went completely just fainted and had a weird reaction. He just could never figure out what it was, and then when they dug deep into it, that's when they discovered that was the case. And I was just like, to me, that was just so fascinating, because that was the first time I've ever experienced anybody talking about past lives with me on the show. And I was like, man, now I'm interested about it, because she was telling me that she had a sense for me that was that in a past life, I was always the person in the shadow with the idea, but never heard. So now that now I have my own podcast, obviously now I'm being heard.
Now you're being heard.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I felt like that before, though, too, because I grew up with other siblings and I was always the middle child. And, a lot of times the middle child, you're never heard, but you're seen, but you're not really seen at the same time. You're kind of in between. So, and I felt that 100%. I kind of felt like what I related to most. Did you ever remember the Brady Bunch movie, Jan? Jan always felt like she was the middle child in the group because that kind of thing. So it's always funny.
Jan, there you go.
Good old Jan Brady syndrome. It's like, I thought it was
You're
so
not
funny,
old enough to be a Brady Buncher.
I'm almost 40. I remember the Brady Bunch. I remember the movies came out. I never watched the Brady Bunch itself. So, but everything else,
I grew up with Brady Bunch. I did.
I grew up in the 90s. It was a different time, but
it was a different time.
It was. Think about it. Like the commercials you see now versus what you see now are way different. Like they had like no subject matter censoring of any sort. Like what is it? There's some commercials I go watch on YouTube sometimes. I was looking at some old commercials, and one was this Jack in the Box commercial, and the guy's sitting in, I think it was in a women's abortion support group or something really weird. I was like, what the hell is going on here? Hey, it's Jack. Yeah, it was like from the 90s. It was like, hey, it's Jack. I'm selling this new sandwich. I'm like, Jack, what the hell are you doing in a clinic, bro? Like, get out of there. Like, what?
That's weird.
I was like, no. What you got to think about it? Like, they had we had all those other TV shows like Beavis and Butthead, Ren and Stimpy. Now, if you look at today's standards, now it's considered adult content because the way the shows were laid out, and things like that. All the humor and stuff that was happening in these shows was just a little too intense for kids our age. Now, for kids now this age, before our age, it was nothing new to us. We seen all this other stuff. Beavis and Butthead was easily to get you because MTV had it on there. So there's no censorship of your television really about the things you were watching. Now you added the internet. Now you really have access to anything. So it's even if you're censoring your television, how are you going to censor the internet to kids? Because they can look up anything they want.
I know, isn't it? And I think I love that there's people like you out there looking for higher frequency is the term I would use, content, providing it, asking the questions, bringing the people together that can talk about real solutions. And and I'm not against, I think that's another thing about the higher frequency place is that it's not a place of being against anything.
No.
So, and that's one of the things I've had to evolve through is not be against Western medicine or medication or, all those things that they're at a different frequency.
Yeah.
And so, but for some people, that's what they need because those people are here and they can get to hear. And that model, I think, is so powerful. And I don't know, we can look at commercials on that too, right? So Dr. Hawkins, is the one that came out with the calibrations for frequency, with 600 being enlightenment and 200 being the average on the planet. And that's been the roadmap that I've been traversing for the last 25 years. And so, it spans decades for some people. Some people may only move a little, like an inch on that roadmap. And that's okay. Everybody has their journey, right?
Yeah.
But for some of us deep souls and complex, beings, like we've been doing this for a while. And maybe that's not the way to say it. Maybe it's that we start to tap into a collective awareness and start doing some of the work for those who aren't still here to do the work, but it's still part of the soul wound.
Yeah.
Or the healing that is necessary for our planet to evolve.
Yeah,
so that's
very true.
What I'll leave with is like, let's do the work that we can do and support the evolution of all of us.
True. Because then when you're gone, then someone else will take over from where your research leaves off, and it starts that chain effect, which is great, because you a lot of people worry about this generation, but I think it's more they don't understand. They're more in tune with certain things, like they don't respond to the same things. They're not in the same mindset. We all have to remember, though, they weren't raised in the same mindset a lot of us were raised in. They have a whole nother thing, like with the internet now, there's so much information at their fingertips. They can find something within seconds versus before we'd had to look at books. And
I know, isn't that so interesting? Like my daughter and her friends, and she's 17, so she's like in high school still, know more than most of their therapists about personality disorders and attachment styles and stuff like that. That's just because I didn't even get that training, at a master's level.
That's so fascinating, though. Are they interested? Is your daughter interested in that kind of stuff? I mean, she knows you.
Yeah,
she's
like,
stuff.
It's so funny. I taught her. So I have something called the Love Solve method. Yeah. It's a basically a work through the emotional wells, which will shift your frequency.
Yeah.
And she started using that, it's just a fill in the blank thing. And she started using that in junior high. I think it was, maybe not even 6th, 7th grade. Right. And she started sharing it with people international. Like it was on her Roblox group or so, whatever, you know what I mean? It was like, she started actually influencing with it and getting some response of like, hey, I want to learn that.
That's so cool, though.
Yeah. And she grew up with emotional intelligence, because I will tell you, like, I found a way to bring emotional intelligence into what I was doing. So my thesis ended up being on the solution for emotional behavioral disorders. And because I had to go pathology, right? But it ended up being something that you would basically call emotional intelligence. And what we found is that the most important time, so in all the meta-analysis I did, the most important time to start teaching this is preschoolers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can teach a preschooler between age 3 and 5, the building blocks for emotional intelligence, it will influence their entire life. And she is evidence of that. She is so evolved.
That's what I've been telling people. I'm telling people, we start teaching these children early on about these things, just in general, and start preparing them for the future. The outcome will be better for them versus what we've had to go through. Let's not let them repeat the things that we've had to deal with for some of us, and a lot of them as early as 4 start understanding a lot more than people realize. Like they're watching everything we do. Mm-hmm. So they're thinking that these are the okay interactions we have. So now I've actually recently got married a couple of years ago, and I have my stepdaughter, which I just call her my daughter anyways, but she's here. Yeah. It's different versus what I did with my girls. My girls were a lot different. Me and their mom to argue all the time in front of them. Now, if we don't argue as much, me and her mom, we don't. If we do, we apologize. We make her understand. We understand that, she understands and can feel the energy of what's going on between us. Like, if they're like, we're having a loud conversation, she'll start panicking a little bit because she thinks we're arguing, and she's like, okay, everybody calm down. And this is a 4-year-old here refereeing this conversation. I'm just like, we're just having we're just talking, and all it is, and I've had to learn with her, it's different. She reacts differently than they do. And then, with my girls, it was way different for her. I've learned so much, so now I apply it differently for her, but she's at a higher emotional intelligence level. Like, she knows a lot more things. Like, this 4-year-old is smarter than most kids at 4. She may not be able to communicate 100%, but she can tell a lot of things about what's going on in situations, and anytime like she feels like a conversation's ramping up, or me and her mom are just getting an exciting conversation about something, she'll always come out and start going, hey, everybody, all right, everybody relax. All right. Starts like waving her hands everywhere. And we're just explaining to her, hey, listen, we're just talking. It's fine. Everything's okay. And things like that too. So,
but she's energy sensitive.
She is really, I really think she is, because she can read the room really easily. Even at 4, she may not be able to fully tell you what she's seeing, but she's on her way right now to learning these kind of things. Since her mom was big into energy and crystals and stuff like that. When we first met, these things I knew nothing about. Hell, I didn't even know about tarot cards, how they actually worked. I knew they were a thing. And her mom would do tarot card readings when we were dating and things like that. It was so interesting because they'd be so close to what my exact thoughts were at the time. It was just like, whoa, hold on. And then she was teaching me about, the crystals and, different things like that, all these different modalities that she had that, I didn't know anything about it at first. She gave me a tiger's eye as a gift one time. And it's ever since I had this weird attraction to it, it's drawn to the whole thing and everything like that, and I would never know anything about this. I had never met her, and then, like I said, the tarot card thing was throwing me off a little bit because, like, how accurate this was, and she didn't have any idea what I was thinking. Like, these cards were right on to what I was thinking, and she was spot on. And she's like, "How close was I?" I'm like, "It's so close that I feel like you're reading my thoughts," And I have a good friend that's named Catherine. She does another podcast, and she does like oracle card readings for me. And one of them, I swear to God, she was reading my thoughts the whole time because I didn't tell her anything. She said, "Hey, this card came up for you, by the way. It said you need to take a rest. You're doing too much." And I was tired. I didn't tell her I was tired. I was exhausted that day. And she's like, "You need to stop drinking all the C4s." And I'm like, didn't tell her I was drinking C4s. All these things are coming through. Like, she's reading this stuff, and it's interesting to me.
Intuition. I actually say that I think that we've gone through the industrial age. We've gone through the technology age. We're still probably in it. But I think the next stage is the intuitive age.
I think so too.
So I think that'll be
it's hard to say no. Think about it, because all those things that happened. We were actually live recording one episode with another woman. She had done some tarot card. She did the oracle readings, and some of what she found was just spot on. And it was crazy because she was more fascinated with me than anything. She's like, "Listen, let's talk about more about you right now." I was like, "Okay." I was like, it went from Pete versus anxiety to let's interview Pete right now. So I was like, all right, cool. Let's go. Let's check this out. Because she was so interesting, because I found her randomly on Facebook. I was posting, and then she was somebody I came across on one of these message boards. And I had this feeling like, hey, I got to do this interview. I got to do this interview because something about this person is going to tell me something. And it did. She was fascinated. And then she started doing the readings live. And the card came out. A couple cards came out, and she was reading them to me and things like that. And it was so interesting to me because I'm so fascinated by these things ever since learning I'm sensitive energy. And then when I met Kat has been telling me things like that too. And then she started doing that with the cards with me. She'll send them to me every week when she'll tell me what they say. And a lot of them are really close. Like, she's not far off it, but that one, she was just nailing every point. I was like, dude, are you calling me out right now? I feel getting called out right now. This is crazy because I didn't tell you any of this information. She goes, I know, isn't this? I'm good at what I do, is what she said. I'm like,
that's wild. So yeah, I guess to wrap up I've got my next thing, but there's some good stuff out there. And if anybody found something in this, they want to explore more, CristineHole.com, but also healthhealingandwholeness.com. So that's the company I developed in 2012, and it's began as a publishing company. So I've got my books coming through that, but also a lot of these solutions like the Zero Point Meridian training and Quantum Wholeness Meditation as part of liberation training, and all that stuff is there. So
awesome. And just the frequency training there too as well, the one where you
on the frequency school. Yeah.
Okay, it's there as well. Awesome, guys. You know where to go find her now. Like she said, go check out her website and everything like. Well, Cristine, thank you so much for coming. This was a great conversation. I had a blast. Let me know what the timeline of the books are, because for sure come back and we can talk more about the books for sure. And you know, and things like that, because I think it'll be a great conversation regardless either way, because I'm interested in reading them. I think it's interesting.
Cool.
And I knew there had to be something more to it with why was it set in 1930? I'm like, there's something. And then you're like, well, I went to this therapist. I'm like, yep, there it is. Here it comes. I said, I had a feeling before you even said it, that's exactly where that came from. So,
yeah.
But all right, guys, we're going to wrap up this episode of Pete versus Anxiety. Cristine, thank you so much again coming, guys. Go check her out. Her new books. Like I said, I'll keep you guys listed on all the books and everything else. Let you know. We'll have her come back and talk to us about it when they're ready to drop. And I'm Pete for Anxiety, pretty much on X all the way down to TikTok. I'm on Spotify all the way down to iHeartRadio. And as I always say, it costs nothing, absolutely nothing to be kind to somebody. One kind act you can do is save somebody's life, or hell, you can save their day. I'm Pete for Anxiety signing off saying, don't ask how your day is today. Say, hey, how's your mental health today?